Society started about a year and a half ago. And, our goal here in Sevastopol is just to preserve all of the history that we possibly can as before people pass or buildings pass, fall down, get broken, taken down, and anything that you have that you would like preserved, family memories, any of those things too, we want to be able to preserve that for the future. Today we kind of picked World War II veterans as our main focus, being, that's the wiser generation. So, they're the wiser ones, so we wanted to get them first. We do plan to do this every year, and I believe next year our focus will be the Korean War, kind of moving. So, we hope that you will join us next year also. All right, I'm going to introduce our moderator for today. And let me tell you, what a wonderful woman. I didn't know her before we started this, but I'll tell you what, she's a great lady. I very much appreciate your help today and all the help you've done so far. Deb Logerquist, which is over on the far end, our moderator, is the daughter of Althea and Colonel Ben Logerquist of Jacksonport. In her words, she was born in Sturgeon Bay, but when 4 months old, she began the life of an Army brat. She received an Army scholarship for veterinary school and served 3 years of active duty as a captain in the veterinary branch at Fort Knox, Kentucky from 1980 to 1983. Currently, Deb is in the American Legion, Door County Commander, and the commander of the American Legion, Post 72 in Sturgeon Bay.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Holly. Welcome here to Sevastopol Historical Society's Veterans Day program. It's really great to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience and a lot of veterans with us. We continue to honor the service and sacrifice of our nation's veterans on November 11th, which is the anniversary of the end of World War I. Now, unlike Memorial Day, which honors those who have died in wartime, Veterans Day honors all those who have served, whether in times of peace or in war. So we're very pleased to have these 5 young men here with us today who will be sharing some of their memories. But to get things started, we're going to play the service songs for all 5 branches of the military. So I'd like any veterans in the audience to please stand during the song for the branch that you served in. And the order is going to be Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard. And this is the chronological order of the year in which the branch was formed. So I know there are some Marines that say the Marine Corps is older than the Army, but we were formed first, so we get to grab the head of the line. So, okay, without further ado, we'll get started with the service songs. Air Force. Army Air Corps will do. Coast Guard. Thank you all very much. Now, veterans know that we were not the only ones who made sacrifices. So at this time, would the spouses or children of any veteran please stand and let us thank you also? Wives, children, I know you're out there. Thank you. So as we said, this year the Historical Society is honoring the veterans of World War II, and we have 5 speakers with us here today, and we have 2 veterans that will be appearing on video. We ask that you hold any questions that you have until the end after we've heard from all the speakers, and then we'll have a question and answer session. So, I'm going to test this out. Ooh, the power. George Bowdener is going to be our first speaker, and he served in the Navy on 8 different ships in the Pacific Theater and reached the rank of lieutenant commander before leaving the Navy in 1977. So we're going to let George lead off the program here today. George?
Thank you. Is Mike live?
Yeah, you can stay seated.
The best is sit down. The microphone looks better. Better sit down. Mind sitting down?
Can't hear me.
Can you sit down? There you go.
Well, we can tell the commander that.
I've always been told to stand in the presence of people that outrank me.
Yeah.
Before I start, there's something I'd like to read which I think puts things in perspective. And I didn't write it, I don't know who did. But it's a definition of a veteran.
Yeah.
A veteran is someone who, at one time in his or her life, wrote a blank check to the United States of America for an amount of up to and including my life. This is honor, and there are too many people in this country who no longer understand it. Thank you. My time in the Navy, I enlisted as soon as I got out of high school, was on an LST. I don't know if most people know what an LST is. They built 1,200 of them in World War II. They're basically a flat bottom scow in which you could carry tanks and trucks, and you could go up onto the beach, open the doors, and the trucks rolled out onto the beach, hopefully. One part of that was that to make sure that you could get back off the beach, you threw out a stern anchor and you prayed that it hooked into something so you could back off. Well, we decommissioned that ship, and then I was put into another ship carrying troops from some of the various islands in the Pacific who had been in some pretty extreme action. We carried a load from Anahuac and Kwajalein, guys that were certainly glad to be out of that hellhole and on their way home. Then shortly after that, I was discharged. I went home to the farm. And then I remembered why I enlisted in the first place. The farm really did not hold that much appeal to me, so I re-enlisted in the Navy in 1946 and retired in 1977, having served in a total of 8 ships in World War II, in Korea, and in Vietnam. My service, the highlights of my service were serving with some of the greatest people on the face of this earth. Your sons, your brothers, yourselves. We are lucky to have people like that in our country. Little history. In 1938 and 39, in a poll of the American public, 98% said they did not want to go to war in Europe. 98% were opposed to any war. And then the Japanese changed our minds on December 7th. And we've been in several wars since then. And thanks to people like yourselves, you that have served, you that have sent the cookies to your children, that have kept their morale up, you've kept this country strong, and we thank you. And thank God for America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Next to George, we have Dick Chappelle, another Navy man, and he was on the USS 299 man a submarine in the Northwest Pacific, serving as a radio and sonar operator. And be sure you take a look at the model of his submarine that he brought in for us over here on one of the side tables. Okay, Dick, take it away.
Incidentally, it has the wrong number on it, the 298, but mine was 299.
Oh, okay.
One more.
Like George, I graduated from high school at 17, and a month after we graduated, I joined the Navy, and I went through radio school, and we had an option, George. Do you want to go into submarines or LST? So now you know the answer. It was a no-brainer, so I enlisted in the submarine service, which is all volunteer at that time. And the other thing is that the submarine sailors got 20% more pay than regular. A little background on the submarine service in general. They represented less than 2% of the Navy. And I'm speaking mostly of the Pacific theater because there was a lot more activity in the Japanese area than in the German area because the Japanese depended on imports from all over the place to get their supplies. We lost 52 submarines during the Pacific theater, 48 by action and 3 by, I guess, what you might call stupidity. We lost 374 officers and 3,102 enlisted men. And while we represented less than 2% of the Navy, the submarines sank 30% of the Japanese fleet and 60% of the Japanese merchant ships. So it was very productive from that point of view. You might know this or not, but the 27 of these submarines that the type that I was on, the Balboa class, were built in Manitowoc. Mine happened to come from the Philadelphia Naval Yards, and I got on board at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where it was commissioned, and we traveled down the Atlantic through the Panama Canal to Hawaii, to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and then on to Midway, and then on to Japan, where we operated up in the Kuril Islands, which is north of Japan. And the purpose of our mission was to plot Russian ships that were coming into the top part of the Sea of Japan. There were at one time 7 American submarines in the Sea of Japan. And once the Japanese knew they were there, they, of course, trapped the north entrance and the south entrance with mines and submarine nets. So it was very difficult for these guys to get out. And our job was to plot the Russian ships, radio them the courses to take so they could get out of the Sea of Japan. Now, we did lose one submarine called the Yahoo, which was in the Sea of Japan, even before this group that I'm talking about. Our second mission was, there was word that the Japanese had built a super sub. And this super sub, they had planned to build 14 of them. And they ended up only building 2, but the super subs they carried 3 airplanes on their submarine. The purpose was to bomb the Panama Canal in New York and Washington, D.C. But fortunately, they never made that, and those 2 super subs are now laying at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Hawaii, and that's the only 2 they ever built. There were 120 subs floating around the Asiatic Pacific Ocean at the time I was there, which is a lot of submarines. In fact, one day we were on board watching a movie, of all things, and on the surface, and for whatever reason, one of the skippers gave the wrong signal, and they crossed bows, and we rammed into the other submarines. So it just show you that there were probably more than we needed at the time. In general, that's about all I had. Well, incidentally, you might recall there was a movie made of the subs in the Sea of Japan called The Hellcats or something like that. It starred Ronald Reagan and Nancy, his wife. And I watched it years ago, and it was sort of like typical Hollywood. It was a little bit overdone. They showed a picture of the launching a new aircraft carrier in Japan, and no sooner hit the water than one of these submarines fired a couple torpedoes and sunk it. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that was a story.
Well, thank you very much, Dick. I learned a lot. Well, next we have an interview with Jack Hirst by video. And Jack was in the Air Force from 1945 to 47 and was an information officer during the Japanese occupation. So now we'll hear what Jack had to share with us.
We're here with one of our Sevastopol residents, Jack Hirst, who lives on Glidden Drive. So Jack, please tell us which branch of service you were in.
The Air Force.
All right, and what outfits did you serve with?
I was in the 5th Air Force in Umegawa, Japan.
And what date or dates what years did you enter the service and how long?
44. I was overseas 18 months. I had basic training in Louisiana, and while I was in basic training, we had just finished and the war with Japan ended. They locked up the barracks, locked us in our little houses because guys would go AWOL. And all we could do would hear people over the radio screaming the war was over. Mm-hmm. But they didn't, the war was over, we knew it, and we were happy. But then we got a notice that they expected, before the war was over, the Japanese to use gas, as in World War I. So they kept us over for 2 weeks in gas warfare. And I was in charge of the guys coming into this building, take their gas mask off to experience gas. And then I looked out there, 300 guys in a hill crying. Then they sent us home for a couple of weeks and right over to Japan. And going over in the ship, we were on the water 21 days because the ship, in the middle of the ocean, the generator blew out. And they finally fixed it, and it was a very rough time. I have all the empathy in the world for pregnant women. The smell of bacon and the ship going like this, and very little light, and guys in front of you and back of you, and the heat. And they had, in the Johns, room for guys to throw up. Over 300 toilets with bars to hang on to. It was rough. And we got to Yokohama. It was night, dark, and you get in a truck, and you're going someplace, you don't know where. And we ended up in a gymnasium with over 350 cots in there. And we all get into bed, and we're in bed, and all of a sudden the building starts shaking. And these little tiny windows started rattling, and the lights started swaying. And over the PA system, it said, United States troops, we are experiencing an earthquake. The town of Osaka is inundated with floods and tides from the ocean. No one is to leave the building until you're told that you may. So there we are in an earthquake. It was kind of spooky. Sent me to Keio University in Japan, to college. And I learned to become information education specialist. And I had to teach myself how to type 40 words a minute to make out reports, which I did. I had a little Japanese kid that worked with me that brought his little box of dead fish and all that stuff to work. It was very nice, but very cocky. He was just, his sister was a Japanese movie star. The average soldier in 1944 was only 5'7", 135 pounds, did not graduate from high school. I was reading love letters to these guys from their girlfriends with lipstick marks and things that I really didn't know about then. And I grew up fast. In basic training, you go and you have to have shots and all that. And here you're standing with about 300 other guys stark naked, and they take your blood. And I looked over, and there were about 50 of them that had fainted after they had their blood taken. I grew up fast in the service. They called me Baka Boy, which means crazy. And one of the reasons they called me crazy is because the Japanese boy that worked for me taught me a song. Otoko no ra, initashita amanita, otoko no ra. I found out it meant Japanese airplanes taking off to bomb Americans.
You learned that after the fact.
Yes, Baka Boy. Also, while I was there, I was in a show with Monty Woolley, the man that came to dinner. And one of my roommates was in charge of picking out hotels for soldiers to go to on rest leaves. And so I got to go to these marvelous hotels with him. And one was at the Grand Hotel at the base of Mount Fuji, which was gorgeous. And at dinner, I'll never forget the dinner. For dessert, they had a pear with chocolate sauce and ice cream. I forget what they called it, snow on the mountain or something, but it was delicious. And we had a Japanese 5-year-old that played classical music on the grand piano. 5 years old. Unbelievable. Tokyo, it looked as if MacArthur had said, I want this building, bomb this. And there would be devastation for miles, but here would be a building that our
That was
government wanted.
untouched.
Yeah, untouched. I had done USO shows in high school. Tapping, twirling a baton, at different camps and did a show with Sally Rand, the stripper. We got more applause than she did. One thing that happened, it's kind of funny. We were at this one camp, I think it was Camp Livingston, Louisiana, and my buddy and I are swimming, and we noticed 3 guys, older guys, standing by the pool. So I get out of the water, and they said, introduce themselves, and I said, well, I'm Jack Hirst. And they said, any relation to William Randolph Hearst? And I said, jokingly, that's my uncle. And I dove back in the water. Well, when I got out of the water again, they're still there. They took us out to dinner, I think because they thought my uncle was William Randolph Hearst. And one Japanese gentleman that spoke English had been educated in California, went to college in California. And they had the women there, older women, geisha girls. She played the violin in our bands or something, and they danced for us. And one Japanese man came up to me. He said, you have shown me what American gentleman is. You come visit us and come see us at our house, but please bring own food. They did give us cigarettes. Everyone smoked, and excessive cigarettes that we sold to the Japanese people that loved them.
That's right, that was a custom, that servicemen,
Yeah, even Henry Fonda,
many of them.
Marlene Dietrich smoked in all the movies. Everybody smoked then.
of course.
But we were trained for combat, you know. And I thought, how can I kill someone my age, his life? I wasn't a conscientious objector. I took the service seriously, but thank God it ended.
I think it's too bad Jack isn't here with us. I think he would have stimulated some very interesting questions. So we'll let George Gamberlin follow that act. And George was in the Army from 43 to 45 and was a rifleman in the 45th Infantry Division in North Africa and Italy, including at the Anzio beachhead. And those who are familiar with the World War II history know Anzio was no picnic. So George, why don't you tell us about your experiences?
Thank you very much. In 1943, I was a 18-year-old freshman going to Indiana University. At the same time, I was enrolled in the infantry, ROTC. At that time, there was need for a lot of boots on everywhere. We were fighting wars on all fronts. And they called up our unit probably because we could field a stripper rifle, we could read a compass, and we could do close order drill. So they called up the infantry regiment from Arkansas, Texas A&M, and Indiana University. And we all landed at Camp Walters in Texas, which was about 75 miles west of Dallas. Upon completion of training there, we shipped out to Africa. I was at Casablanca and finally went through the Atlas Mountains and ended up at Iran, where we embarked for Italy. I landed in Italy as a replacement rifleman for the 45th Division, which was from Oklahoma. It had a lot of chiefs, as you could probably imagine, being from Oklahoma. But anyhow, we quickly got assimilated into this group, and we were fighting in the mountains of Italy, in Venafro, and Caserta. After that period, they pulled us back to a rest area, and we got to see Humphrey Bogart while we were there. He made an appearance with his wife, which at that time was a Class B movie star, I guess. Mayo Mento or something, that was her name. But anyhow, his biggest line was, "I'm looking for some gunmen to take back to Hollywood with me." So after that, we embarked on LSTs and LCIs for Anzio Beachhead. Now, Anzio was about 30 miles south of Rome. It was 140 miles that we end-runned from Naples, where we embarked, to Anzio. So we're way out of our lines, and there weren't many of us there. I found out that there were 10 German divisions fighting 3 American divisions, but we lasted there for, I think, 5 months. And on the day of the breakout, I got wounded. And about an hour after our breakout. And suddenly they pulled me back, and I was laying in a trench, which was where Mussolini had drained the land to give to veterans of the Ethiopian War. And it was dry, but it was kind of like wetland, if you call it here. Anyhow, it gave protection, and all of a sudden my troops, my squad, all pulled back, and they had to leave me there. I was there on one day, one night, and the next day, and I didn't have any water, and I was dying of thirst because I'd taken sulfa, and sulfur required you to take a lot of water, and I didn't have any water. So it was getting late on the second day. I heard voices coming down this drainage ditch. And I thought, oh boy, they've come to find me. Well, much to my amazement, I looked up and I saw they were Germans. But none of them could speak English, and they didn't have any water. But after some discussion or talks, they carried me on a greatcoat for about 2 hours down this ditch till we came onto a road. And coming on the road was a GI in a Jeep. And he got so scared when he saw these 22 Germans, because it looked like an army to him, I suppose. And he stalled his Jeep, and he ran and jumped in a ditch beside the road. And the Germans ran down the road hollering, "Kameraden, Kameraden," you know. And I guess that the reason I was picked up by those Germans was my outfit had pulled back, made an attack in another area, and that left all these Germans wandering around for someone to give up to. So I really captured 22 Germans. But finally, back to the guy in the ditch. The Germans ran down the road and finally coaxed him out of the ditch. And sure enough, they found me and they lifted me onto the Jeep, and the guy took me to a VAC hospital. And Germans, he pointed with a direction for them to go, and they all waved and whistled when I left. So it proves that, I don't know, we were all kind of human at that time and a victim of war. But I spent the next 20 months then in a hospital. I was in VAC hospitals. I was in a general hospital where Mussolini had built buildings for the 1940 World's Fair, which they were going to have, but naturally they didn't have it at that time. But the buildings were there, and they used them as hospitals for American troops. I came home on a Navy hospital ship. There were 17 of us and 1,000 Seabees, and they were all Section 8. They raised a lot of big ruckus when they got aboard that ship for home. I then spent 15 months of the 20 at a hospital in Chicago, right next to the veterans from World War I can't even think of the name, Bowdener Hospital. And there were, funny thing about it, there were 4 patients in that ward when I got there. It was for 16. And they served beer every day for 16. And they figured it out after about 3 days. But anyhow, I got out of the Army, and at the end of 1945, 2 days before Christmas, I was so happy. And I went back to school in Indiana, then at that time. And that's about all I have to say.
Well, that was great. Thank you very much, George. That was great. We're going to move on now to John Fulkerson, who was in the Army Infantry, and he was at Luzon and was in training for the Japanese invasion, but fortunately that wasn't necessary. We really lucked out there. So John is with us here today to share his memories.
Hello.
Come closer. Yeah, you gotta
What?
get closer to the mic.
Okay.
There you go.
Now?
Go ahead, Tom.
Our paper yesterday had some interesting statistics on veterans. You may or may not have seen it, but he said in the United States there are 21.5 million veterans, 1.8 million World War II veterans, and 2,600 veterans in Door County. So that was rather interesting. I grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, not too far from here, and I graduated from high school in June of 1943, and I turned 18 that same month. And I was immediately drafted, and we went up to Fort Snelling, which is near Minneapolis, St. Paul, and had our physicals, and we went back to get in, and then we finally went on the last time up there in September. We were in the service at that point. We did a few non-essential jobs around Fort Snelling, waiting to find out what we may do, and I was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, for infantry training. Now, Fort Benning is a big fort down by Columbus, Georgia, and has been the infantry center of our entire Army. And we had about 4 months of training. It was very intensive. You had to shoot every kind of gun you could, and you would hope you'd get some good marks on it. It was, you had to have your bed just perfect. You know, you could, your shoes shine and everything else. In other words, it was discipline you had, and you learned there at Fort Benning. An offshoot of that, we also went out and put packs on and did 25-mile hikes, which is typical for infantrymen. 50 years later, at Columbus, Georgia, right where that camp is, I saw a doctor up there and had my left knee replaced. So that's just a coincidence. I guess. I didn't wear it out in the Army, I don't think, 'cause it was probably some, I worked in the paper industry, and there was a lot of walking in the paper industry up and down the aisle, so. I was in an outfit called ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program. And the gist of this program is that we were finishing our basic training, but we were then going to go to college. And the Army or the country wanted, still filtering through the system, some engineers and scientists. So the idea was not everybody had to go into, into the combat areas or something. They'd go and go to school. And I was set to go to Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. I didn't even know where that was, and I didn't go because about a week later that program was suspended. And I was sent to the 94th Infantry Division in Camp McCain, Mississippi. That's near Grenada, Mississippi, if anybody cares to know that. And the 94th had been training there, and they were they were combat ready at that point. They had done all their training. They were just marching up and down the parade ground and playing baseball and things like that, just waiting for their turn, and it did come. But before they left to go overseas, for some reason I was attached unassigned. And I went to a group headquarters field artillery in Camp Bowie, Texas. Now, that's near Brownwood if you want to look at maps, but that's a big area out there. It was a new camp at that time. And the group headquarters had, I guess you'd call it battalions of armored tanks and cannons that had to be directed. And my job was in communications. I actually was a lineman. And we strung telephone wires and ran radios and stuff down from the group where the top officers were located down to the people that were going to be shooting the guns. And we trained and trained and trained and at Brownwood, or Camp Bowie. Then they moved us to Camp Hood. And I guess you know recently they had a problem at Camp Hood when a major there, evidently a Muslim, killed about 13 people. And that has not come to trial yet. But at any rate, that's a problem for the Army. But we trained at Camp Hood, and I even went to a machine gun school once. We went out and we shot at, they would have the targets, and they'd throw them along. And we were worked in teams, and we had one guy that was really bad. I mean, he could not shoot very good at all. And actually, when the general came down to see what we were doing, he was the one doing it. And so he didn't say much. So we decided to, no, we had to. The next stop was to have he stop firing. I took on asbestos gloves, and you take out the barrel. It's the 50 caliber machine gun barrel. It's very hot. And I took it out. The general said, "You didn't check headspace." So I said, "Yes, sir." But so I got chewed out by a general as I was a private. Well, I guess we finally got all our training in, and we went overseas. We went to California, and I noticed somebody else talked about seasickness and rough weather coming out of San Francisco. I think our boat that we were on with so many people, I think they went very slow or they broke down some of the time. But we went to Manila, and we went up into northern Luzon, and we were there was still active fighting in Luzon at that time, but we were not near that. I had no combat experience. That war ended up very quickly right after we got there. Again, we were training, just putting out wires, keeping communications with our group, and obviously it was before the invasion of Japan. So that would be the thing that would be our next real problem if we had to do it. And as you know, they dropped the atomic bombs. My wife had to be reading recently that they had already picked a date, and it was November of that year they were going to invade Japan. But in the meantime, they were bombing them from aircraft carriers, and the Russians were coming down through Manchuria, so there was a lot of pressure on Japan. But the decision was made to drop those 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that ended the war. And so I didn't have any combat. I was probably on the verges of it, but very, very fortunate that it was not necessary to invade Japan. We then had to see how many points you had. You had to collect points based on years of service or years of service overseas, and that gave you a number, and then that was, if people had higher numbers, they went home first. And I didn't get home until April of 1946. And so I was in 2.5 years, very interesting experience. I probably did more guard duty, dug more latrines, and did more KP than anybody, because I was usually about the low-level guy in the unit. So it was not all hunky-dory, but I'm still here to talk about it. So that's about it.
Thank you very much, George. George's experiences remind us that, it was not just those who saw combat action during World War II that still provided very, very vital service for our country. The support troops and those that were in training, they were every bit as important to the war effort as those who saw action overseas. So I'm really glad that we had that perspective that John was able to give us here today. We're going to now have a video of an interview with Leo Niemeyer. He was Army Tank Corps in Europe. And Leo is with us here today, so I'd like to ask him to stand up and let us recognize his service. Thank you. Okay, and now we'll watch his interview.
This afternoon, we're talking with Leo Neimeyer, a longtime resident of the town of Sevastopol and a Door County native, and his experiences in World War II. Leo, could you tell me where you were born?
Right there on the farm where, next to Gabert's there.
On Oak Road, town of Big Harbor?
Yeah,
And you lived on a small farm, about
80 acres.
80 acres. And you had quite a few brothers and sisters.
There's 13 of us altogether.
13.
Yeah,
And that was a fairly small house.
yeah, not that big. There was an upstairs, of course, but not too big a house.
A lot of people fit in a little house.
Yeah, of course. There's some of them worked out too.
Sure.
The older ones, I mean.
And you went to basic training first?
Yeah, yeah.
How tough was that?
That was kind of tough from a farmer.
Was it hard getting used to having people tell you what to do?
Well, kind of, because you're your own boss most of you, up until then. Yeah, there was a sergeant there always doing a lot of marching, That's all it was.
After basic training, then they sent you to a different place. Was that to learn how to be a gunner or how to be a tank crewman?
Well, we had some basic training in Camp Cook, California. And then from there, we went to Texas, which Camp Hood had some more. Then Fort Lewis, Washington, we had a little more yet. And from there, we went overseas.
Did they train you specifically to be a gunner?
To what?
To be a gunner in the tank destroyer?
Well, I suppose. That's where they put me.
That's where they put you.
I wasn't too bad at it, I guess.
Do you have any idea why they picked you to do that? Or did you volunteer to do that?
Oh, no, I didn't volunteer to do anything.
That's the first rule in the Army, never volunteer to do anything.
Another thing. We were drafted back then. And we went to Fort Sheridan, Illinois. We were there a couple days, and we were sent to Camp Cook, California, in Los Angeles, someplace out there. And from there, we was there a while. Then they sent us to Camp Cook. It was in Texas, Camp Hood, Texas. From there, we went to Fort Lewis, Washington. And from there, we went on a train across the country to New York. Went on the English big boat and went over to Europe. And all our equipment was over there already.
Were you afraid of submarines on the way over?
No, we were young and we weren't afraid of nothing.
Wasn't it called a tank destroyer?
Tank destroyer.
A tank destroyer.
I was a gunner.
And you were the gunner.
I was sitting here, the gun was right here. 75 millimeter, big one. And
What kind of noise did that make when it went off?
pretty good, because it recoiled.
It recoiled?
You know, and we was at one place. You want me to tell you? We was in. It was in Europe anyway, and we were stationed, and the Germans had a couple tanks down in the across the road in the bushes, and my tank commander gave me the yardage. I let her go and took out the track. Then the tank had to stay there. Then through the binoculars on there, I could see all the guys jump out. And they took off. Russia was fighting Germany. Russia was losing the battle a little bit. Who do you think had to step in? Our boys. And you know the guy they call Hitler? He killed his wife and he committed suicide when he knew he couldn't make it anymore. We stopped in Belgium it was a little village, and went in the house, and their houses, the butcher shop was attached to the house. I was 21 and I'm 92. 21 back then.
21. You were born in 1919?
Yeah. We almost lived we did. We lived in that damn tank.
That was your house?
Sure.
Sure. Do you remember how many people were in that tank destroyer?
Sure. Driver, assistant driver. I was the gunner, and I had assistant to put the shells in. They were not big.
Sure.
Not that long. AP and HE, high explosive.
High explosive.
We was on high ground, and they was down there low. And I'll be damned if they didn't hit the tank I was in. But it wasn't that bad. It's somewhere up by the turret, you know, where that turret goes around. And we kept on going and got out of there.
Did you have a good driver?
Oh, yeah. A guy by the name of Frank Walton from Indiana, I never forget it. You know, I was a young guy. I don't know how old I was. But he was 10 years older than I was. He was in the service. And he was the driver that he drove that tank.
So you think he got you out of some close ones?
Close shaves. You bet. I know when we got hit that time, the front end of the tank come up a little.
Really?
Because he took off.
What did you eat when you were in the tank destroyer?
To just give us
the heck they call it. Something that'll keep, sandwiches.
No, sea rations?
Yeah, sea rations.
Did you get sick of those after a while?
Oh, all the time.
Were the people happy to see you?
Yeah.
They were grateful.
They were glad to see
We're
us.
glad to see you after how the Germans had been there.
Yeah, after we chased them out.
So how did you get home? Did you fly home or did you go back on a ship?
No, when we come home on a smaller boat. Not those great big ones, just a smaller one.
And what rank were you when you got out?
Just corporal, 2 stripes.
A corporal, 2 stripes. And I think you got a Purple Heart, didn't you?
Yeah, that's someplace at home.
Do you remember how that happened?
Oh, when my tank got hit.
When your tank got hit?
I guess I got wounded a little bit. They gave me a Purple Heart.
Okay.
Oh, in the shipyard. That's how I worked in the shipyard. And such a place. It's so damn hot in the summer. And just the opposite in the winter, cold.
Steel is never the right temperature.
Uh-uh.
And you lived on the farm in Sevastopol for
Yeah,
about 50 years or more.
yeah. And bought that 80 across the highway.
On the old Bassford farm.
Yeah,
So you had a 160-acre dairy farm.
yeah.
Lots of work.
Worked my butt off. I get up at 4:30, milk 25 cows, eat breakfast. 7 o'clock, I go out in the field. And I come in, do the chores, eat supper, and then I go out for an hour or 2 yet out in the field to get done what I didn't get done.
Yeah. So Leo, is there anything else you'd like to say about your war experience?
I'm glad it was over when it was over.
Glad to be home.
Yeah.
I think Leo expressed the sentiment of most guys. They were glad it was over when it was over. That was great, Leo. Well, last but definitely not least is Bob Graef. And he was a Marine in the 2nd Division, 7th Service Depot from 43 to 46, and started off in the MPs, but ended up as a headquarter company clerk after serving in a bunch of the islands, Saipan, Okinawa, Tinian. And again, war historians recognize most of those islands, and also in China. And before I let him get started, I'm going to, do the old saw that all us Army types always talk about. You can always tell a Marine, but you can't tell him much. And with that, Bob.
Thank you for your comments, but if I might say one thing right off the bat, you are wrong. The Army was not started before the Marines.
I told you.
Yesterday, we had the Marines' 275th birthday party. That's when their birthday is. The Marines were started before it became the United States. They were the first military thing before it was the United States. Continental group of states at that time created the Marine Corps to protect the ships. That's why they were called leathernecks, because they wore leather things so that the pirates and that, if they went with their swords and that, could not cut off their heads.
Oh, wow.
That is the Marines, and they were inaugurated before the U.S. even came to be. So it's before the Army. A couple other things, I want to say a few things right off the bat, is that I would like to have just a moment of silence for all of guys that have been killed in World War II and every time since, but particularly World War II. One of the things that in World War II was the fact that it just came out recently, and I was able to correct our colonel that was a speaker at the special thing for the Marines. And he brought up a point which he didn't even realize, that today 1% of our population is in service, which makes it rough, and the guys have to go back 3 and 4 times. In World War II, we didn't get a chance to go back. As they told us in the Marines in training, there's one way you'll get out of the Marines, and that's in a wooden overcoat. There was no other way. You did not get to go home. Today, 90% of the wounded in combat are saved. They may lose limbs and all that, but they are saved. In World War II, less than 70% that were wounded were ever saved. You were wounded, you were gone. That's it. There was no way, because we didn't have helicopters, for one thing. I enlisted in the Marines in 1942, and although I enlisted, they would not take me in at that time because they said that you had to be 18, and I wasn't 18 yet. So as soon as I was 18, I was put in active service. I'll mention that also, that the Marines all the way through have always been volunteers. Never were we involved in the draft. Never have been and still aren't. I was trained in basic training in California. I was from Chicago, and that's where some of us went, and I was one of them that went there. And from there, I went to Camp Linda Vista, Camp Elliott for marksmanship, which I was a sharpshooter. I was put into the scouts and snipers, actually. And after going through that training, I was able to come home, they said, for 10 days prior to going overseas. Of course, 10 days, it was 3 days just to get home because of my train, and 3 days to get back. Actually, I was a day late getting back, but it wasn't my fault. 2 days late, but it was because of the trains going back. While I went home, I asked my father to use his car. And because he had taken over the Boy Scout troop that I was running as a 17-year-old and 18-year-old, and one of the fellows I had there, by the name of Frank Scanlon, had been slightly injured, and my dad had taken him home. And I knew his mother and so on because she's the one that brought him. So all the time for 2 years before that, that Frank had wanted me to meet his sister. I wasn't interested. So I went there to see Frank, and while there I felt that already I was trained for combat and so on, and I felt this feeling behind there that somebody was there, and there was. And that was his sister. She was an honor student in high school. She lost the honor that couple of days because we were together all the time. And I had my mind made up. Right after that, we went overseas. And my service record shows that I was in the Fleet Marine Force from the 5th of February of 1944. I went, we toured many things. We went to Hawaiian Islands. I saw what happened with the Japanese. Just gave me more feeling on what I had to do. Not that I didn't have any thoughts not to do it, but I saw a lot more of it. And so we went in there, and I was sent to the island of Maui I was in the MP company, but I was also in the 7th Service Regiment, which was to get the supplies and that to the troops. And they asked anybody who had a driver's license. Well, I did. not too many of my age at that time, had driver's license, but I did. They said, okay, get in that M5, which is a huge truck, loaded with ammunition. And I never drove a truck. But suddenly I was a driver. So there I went, up mountain roads in Maui, the island of Maui. No lights, because the Japanese are still there, still bombing. And I made 5 trips going up that mountain with no lights. And boy, I learned how to drive a truck. From there, we went back on ship. And we weren't boats, they were ships, by the way. And we went to the Marshall Islands. We didn't have to invade the Marshall Islands because they were getting it cleared up because they were going to do it for the testings for the atomic bomb, actually. But we had to make sure that things are clear there. And from there, we went to the island of Saipan, which is in the Marianas Islands. Most people don't know about the Saipan. Saipan was the next door neighbor to Tinian. It's like you can see across the bay here, to the other side, that's the island of Tinian. And that's what they wanted, was Tinian, because it didn't have islands. It was a coral atoll, and there was an airfield on it. And they wanted that island because of trying to get the B-29 bombers in. And they thought our intelligence was so great at that time. They thought, well, the troops, the Japanese troops, they knew they had come in. They had been there for many, many years. They were on Tinian, guarding that airfield. They weren't. They were on Saipan. So we, like a bunch of guys, went into Saipan, and it was the worst battle that took place in the whole Pacific. I happened to be lucky enough, I was in the 3rd wave. And I sure remember that. And I mean, like what some others mentioned, I was 18 years old, nothing could happen to me. So I laid on the side of the landing craft. You know, I'm laying there, you know, taking in the view and all that stuff, and just on the side of it. I wasn't worried about nothing. And I thought, boy, look at all that shelling on our poor guys, the 1st wave and 2nd wave were really blasting that landing, because that's our troops doing that. That's our Navy ships in that. And I'm laying there and say, boy, I said, it's going to be easy for us to come in. And of course, we keep circling around. And as we get closer, all of a sudden, zoom, zoom, shots are going around. What the heck is going on? Our guys are shooting us. No. All that shooting was the Japanese. They were shooting our troops. The LST right next to me got hit, and I knew all them guys. Got hit direct, and boy, I'm still laying on the gunnel. And got bodies flying around. I mean, it was just really something. And boy, there we went. And I'll tell you, it was really something. The 3rd wave. My MP company, which I was in the MP company, but it was a combat MP, got pretty well wiped out, including myself. And some of the stuff I can't remember, but I know I was on a hospital ship. I think it was the USS New Mexico that they had used it on. It got hit by a Japanese plane right into the sick bay. I had just got off of that because they said my injuries weren't bad enough. Go back in. We need you. So, and I was in the on the ladder going down when that hit. And I really, some of the stuff I just don't remember anymore. But I mean, I can't remember it. The next thing I know, a 1st sergeant from the MTs grabbed a hold of me and says, "Where you been, Graef?" He knew me. I didn't know who I was. And he said, "Well, you've been given up as being lost in action." And my folks, and in fact, you got some envelopes there that I brought. I didn't know about it, but my sister got them from my mother and her that were returned and said that I was gone. They couldn't deliver the stuff. From that, I ended up with the headquarters company because they were wiped out just about. And so there I was, and I ended up in the headquarters company as a company clerk. And I'll tell you, you talk about rough duties, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. I became a PFC, combat experience, PFC, and shortly thereafter, I was made the corporal in charge of the headquarters company, which was over the whole regiment, everything, come through the headquarters company. It's a lot of work because there are a lot of, death notices and so on that I sent out. But people don't realize that, for example, in the Marines, which we had the 2nd and 4th Divisions, there were 3,200 Marines killed on Saipan, killed. There are 5,000 some that were injured on Saipan. The Army, which we had one division, the Army in the center, they had a total of 3,600 injured or killed. It was one of the worst battles of the Pacific War. A lot of people don't realize that. I was on Saipan I tell you, things really got really good after things got squared away. And we were there quite some time. And then then we went on board ship again to go in the next battle. And that was, we landed on Okinawa on April 1st of 1945. Now, on Saipan was on June 15th of 44, so there was quite a bit of time in between. But because we had to get other guys to come in because we were wiped out, and so was the 2nd Division and 4th Divisions. And so we had to wait for guys to come from Peleliu and so on. And so there was a lot of training and so on. But I happened to be in the right spot, being on as the company clerk. We invaded Okinawa on April 1st of 45. And different. We thought we were going to get hit again, but we came in Red Beach on Okinawa, and I tell you, I got a lot of pictures there from it. I couldn't believe it. We came in there were no Japanese troops there. The Japanese figured it out that to hit the Marines right off the bat on the beaches wasn't working. So what they did is they split their armies to the north and to the south. And we happened to be coming in the center, which was usually what we did. And it was nothing. I shouldn't say nothing, but virtually nothing. So Okinawa, to me, was quite a bit of difference. On Okinawa, as time went on, we did see I can't think of the mountain now, up on the north end, and we tried to get the Japanese civilians, I shouldn't say Japanese civilians, but the Ryukyu Islanders, which were not Japanese, and they were mainly Polynesians. But the Japanese were there, and and they were jumping off the cliffs with their babies and everything else, and they were forced by the Japanese soldiers to do that. And later on, we would go down there to swim and so on, and it was all bones because they get barracudas and so on. You got a picture there of barracuda going after one of our guys. So that was really something to be involved in. We never did go north. The Marines, my outfit stayed on we stayed on the north end. The south end, they went after that army there, the Japanese army. And that's where the General Buckley was killed up north. And from there, we got aboard ship again, and we were told they didn't cut anything from the Marines, actually. I will read one thing here. I wrote a letter. Of course, I was company clerk. I could get away with a lot. And believe me, I did. And I wrote a letter to my sister, who was still living, very close. We were very close because we had a brother that was 7 years older than us. And then my sister and I was 3 years younger than I so we were really close. And I always called her Red because she had a redhead. This letter is written the 4th of October, 1944. I won't go through the whole letter, but I do have one thing I want to say, because I wrote this in 1944 after the battles of Saipan, and I had gotten a letter from her which she was trying to figure out. So I say, "Gee, sis, I really owe you an apology, for I really did forget your birthday. You don't know just how bad I feel about this, as I never used to forget dates before. If you only could begin to realize just what's all on my mind. Mainly if I'll live through the next one or not, you'd understand. I hope all is okay with us, and to make sure when I come back, we'll pitch a whipperoo of a date together, alone. By then, we both will be older. We already are, and we can have a good time. But remembering my memory, we, or rather you, had better save this letter to show me when I come back. Just between you and me, sis, I don't think I will be able to keep this date, for I don't think I will live through this war. Don't tell Mom and Dad this. It's very personal. I know I can trust in you. Many a night I awaken with a jolt and I find myself sweating, even though it's rather cool here at night. For I had been thinking of combat and death. Mom is very worried about me, and by telling you all this, I'm only giving you an advance notice so you can plan a campaign just in case the warlords do claim me. More than anything else, I want Mom to stop worrying. And when I do come back, I want all of you to be there to greet me. Well, enough of this nonsense. I'm still here, and a bad penny always turns up. You can't get rid of me that easy, sis. I was always lucky, and there's no reason to stop such practice now. Not on my part, you won't. I wanted to read that because I didn't even remember this. We went on to invade Tokyo. The Marine Corps was going in, my division and other divisions were going in to hit Tokyo itself. And we were told right out that they expected 98 to 99% of total casualties. They let us know that so that you know what you're at, what you have to do. And we were there, right outside Tokyo Harbor when they dropped the atomic bomb. Sometime, many years after that, a friend of mine had a wedding and he had some school teacher there and she didn't know about my experience. And she says, oh, you were in World War II. Yes, that's right. She says, isn't it terrible what we did to the Japanese dropping that atomic bomb? And Maud was sitting next to me. She grabbed a hold of me. She says, don't. It's a guy's wedding. And there were about 12 people there. And finally, she kept it up. And I remember my Marine Corps language. Oh, more than I time. That's the problem. People don't understand. And the teachers, this was a teacher coming out with something like that. And I let her know. And of course, then she said, oh, well, they dropped the second atomic bomb. Even the Japanese, in figures that come out later, thank God that we dropped the second atomic bomb. The Japanese themselves figured out between 10 to 12 million would be killed in the invasion. And it would be mostly the kids because all the older ones are gone. And that's what they actually figured. So, and we figured about 2.5 to 3 million. So we didn't drop the bomb. But what happened were Marines. So what happened? They says, oh, you guys are combat vets. They sent us on to China. And the reason why is because there were 1.5 million Japanese troops all along the border of China because they had invaded China years before. They didn't know. That was the Crown Prince, who today is the emperor. He was the Crown Prince and he didn't sign the peace treaty. A lot of people don't realize that. But we went in there as Marines because Marines are allowed to go into any country, that's international law, without declaring a war. So we weren't declaring a war on China. So we could come in there, and that's what we did. So all these guys are getting all these points. I looked up my records. I had 185 points. Other guys were getting out, the Army was getting out with 100 points and less. Not me. They had to wait for, now here I'm the company clerk. So they had to wait till they get a replacement for me. Well, everybody was getting out. So I got stuck there until February. You know, no replacements. So I was there for another 7 months. But I'll tell you, I had my own room because I was the company clerk. Believe me, you officers, they would come to me because I was doing this duty roster. They would come to me to see what was what. I had my own houseboy. Joe, the houseboy, the Chinese guy. I got tea and crumpets every morning. I mean, boy, I don't know. It was really experience in being a company clerk and being in China. I talked to another good guy, some of you guys may know him, neighbor of mine who just passed away. He was a company clerk in the Army, actually, in Philippines. And Homer Bliss, some of you know. And Homer Bliss, and when we found out, we were very good friends, and we found out one time, we're on board, going up north to the ship. He said, what were you, Bob, again? He says, I know you were in college, and he was too, and he says, I was a company clerk. He said, well, so was I. He said, boy, wasn't that great? Yeah, because really, the company clerk was the guy. So that's my experience. I'll tell you the thing that I saw in China, the good stuff and the bad stuff. I told Maud when we got back home, and many others, that a lot of women in this country, at that time anyhow, should have seen how the Chinese women and Japanese women were treated. You talk about opposite women's lib. We were told definitely don't get in on anything. Well, you'll see groups of people and they'll be beating up some woman there. And boy, it was hard for us not to do something. But that's the way it was. If a woman said anything, it doesn't make any difference. Boy, they put her in a circle, and other women had her in the middle of it and beating her up and so on. I mean, it's really tough. And that's the way they were. I mean, that's of course, you still got some of that over in that part. So there's a lot of things that I learned. The biggest thing I think I learned, but I learned a couple of things. One thing, I learned how to duck. And the other thing I learned is that we have a great thing in this country, what goes on and everything else. And I'll tell you, you learn all different types of people, which I did. Not only the gooks, as I call them, on the islands, the different types of islanders, how their different feelings are, and also the Chinese and the Japanese. So you learn that, and you realize that there is a lot of difference. But I made it. I got back home in February 1945, and then I told Maud, I said, well, that's it. She didn't know that. I convinced her. So anyhow, that's my story, and I learned a lot of stuff over there. I will say this, if anybody can help. I was asked a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, to give a talk to some students on World War II. There's supposed to be 3 of us, go to St. Peter and Paul School right down here. And the only guy that showed up was me. So I was able to talk to the kids. They liked it, so they had me go to Sevastopol School there. I went through that. Then it got some others began to go, and then they asked me to go to other schools and some other guys. I had my dog tags. It's 883980. I sure know it. That's why it's in my head. I had my Purple Heart. I had 2 Japanese flags. I had many other things, mementos and so on. They're all gone. Some one of these schools, and I don't know which one, it's hard for me to remember. So anybody knows, any kid that's got some of this stuff, or any grandkid, believe me, give it to the colonel is back here, return it, because I mean, you can't replace that. I did happen to keep the money, which is there. That's Japanese money, by the way, for invasion. They were going to take Australia, they were going to take over the west coast of this country. But I happened to get that. And I'll tell you, the guy I got it from, it was a colonel, and he didn't care. Happened to be a Japanese colonel.
Yeah.
I happen to have something to do with it. So,
Well, thank you very much, Bob. I think I'm going to have to start calling you Radar. Sounds like you did pretty well for yourself. I'd like to thank all of our group here for sharing their memories and their service. And this is when we'll give the audience a chance if there are any questions for any of.
George Bowdener, would you mind sharing your little experience? Would you mind sharing the experience you had testing bombs? Do you remember which story I'm referring to?
I'm sorry. One of the things that went with my career was a loss of hearing.
Would you share your story about your experience with when they were testing bombs, when they were testing the atomic bomb?
The atomic bomb,
Do you remember? Do you know what I'm referring to?
the atomic bomb.
Well, one experience, I was on a research ship that was down at Johnston Island. This was in the 70s. And the Air Force was testing nuclear weapons in the upper atmosphere. And the ship that I was on, we had about 900 people. And for this test, we were told to put goggles on and turn our backs to the island because this blast was going to go up and hopefully go way up and explode. Well, this one blast exploded just after it lifted off. The captain and I were on the bridge with our back to the island, and we had dark or glass, red glasses on, hands over our eyes, and when that thing went off, we could see every bone in our hands. I don't understand nuclear energy, but that scared the bejeebers out of me.
Thank you, George. Any other questions? Well, if not, I really want to, again, thank all of you for sharing your remembrances. And we especially thank you for all your services and the sacrifices that you made to help preserve our freedom both here and abroad. So we're going to conclude our program with the Sevastopol School's song, American Tears, and it's sung by the elementary grade students of the school.